he was a farmer. He'd wake up, 4 o'clock in the morning, put a pot of coffee on, sit in his recliner, smoke a cigarette before he left. And my grandmother, after he passed, for quite some time, she would wake up in the morning, there'd be a pot of coffee on, a burning cigarette in the ashtray, and she thought she was losing her mind.
Well, hello there. I'm Cool Gray, and this is Cool Gray in Studio A. Welcome back to the podcast. We are in episode 11, and it is the fourth of 6 episodes dedicated to my series titled Personal Paranormal Encounters. I'm having an amazing time with this particular series. It's an area of interest that has been with me really most of my life. I am incredibly grateful for the conversations I've been able to have with some people who are extraordinary and have had extraordinary experiences in their lives. I'm really thrilled to have a podcast that gives me an opportunity to reach out and invite these people to engage in conversation. And I truly hope you're getting the same thrill and the same intellectual stimulation that I am getting out of this entire series. And the series before it, actually. If you haven't caught up with all of the episodes yet, I encourage you to go back and find me on your favorite platform. And if you prefer the video version, go ahead and pop over to my YouTube channel. All those links are in the show notes, and you can watch these episodes in video form. I'm not going to chat a lot today because I really am excited to get to my guest. He is a returning guest. He was with me for the previous series, and he's coming back for this one as well. I'll introduce you to him in just a moment. We're going to talk about ghosts today and several other things, but primarily ghosts. And that's something I've really honestly never known what to make of. But as a result of this group of conversations that I've had, some of which you may have already heard, some of which are upcoming, do not miss them. I've been introduced to a couple of ways to look at this particular phenomenon that I had never considered before. So that's really why I'm podcasting, is for the opportunity to, first of all, have interesting conversations with interesting people. And then secondly, to stimulate my own mind to think and think more deeply about areas of great interest to me, but also to encourage you to do the same thing. So if you think you know what the whole ghost phenomenon is all about, keep listening. Your ideas may be challenged. They may be confirmed. They may be completely blown out of the water. Or you might just think, I'm a crackpot and so are all of my guests. You know what? It's all okay. All I'm interested in is for you to listen, engage your brain, and have a great time. So without further ado, let's move ahead and let me introduce you to today's guest. I want to welcome back to the podcast a guest that was with me for the previous series that I did called Creativity Born of Trauma. And if you haven't heard that series yet, go back and listen to it. It's pretty cool. So today I have returning Ross Hamil. Ross is born and bred West Texas guy. He grew up in Odessa and moved to Lubbock after high school. Hailing from a creative and musical family, it's no surprise that Ross ended up where he is, working in video production and being the frontman for a hard rock band. With his company, Hamil Brothers Studios, Ross has traveled around the United States working on jobs for companies such as Oculus, Facebook, and Pennzoil. His current band, Labor XII, launched their debut album, Monsters, in November of 2021. It's a quasi-concept album with its central themes being trauma and grief. And we talked about that at length in our previous episode, including playing for you in its entirety one of the songs from that album. So I would encourage you to go back and find Ross Hamil. You'll see that he'll be featured in the title. So if you like what you hear when you get to know him in another way today, you can go back and fill in those blanks. Ross, thanks for coming back. It's good to see you.
It is good to be back. I appreciate the invitation. So I guess the last one didn't horribly bomb. So
we were willing to take another stab at it. Well, today we're talking about a very different topic and one that is not necessarily everybody's cup of tea. So my goal here today is to hear about some personal paranormal experiences that you have had in your life. From what the little that you and I have discussed about that, you are telling me that for you, those experiences started when you were quite young. So let's talk about that very first one.
So, first one I remember was I don't know exactly how old I was, but my granddad on my dad's side passed when I was 6 years old. He was 57 and had a massive heart attack. The best way to describe it is he hung around his house for a long time after he was gone. You know, lots of encounters there, not just myself, but what kind of started, and I didn't know any of this when I was younger. I didn't hear about this until after I was older. But he was a farmer. He'd wake up, 4 o'clock in the morning, put a pot of coffee on, sit in his recliner, smoke a cigarette before he left. And my grandmother, after he passed for quite some time, she would wake up in the morning, there'd be a pot of coffee on, a burning cigarette in the ashtray, and she thought she was losing her mind.
You're saying there was physically a pot of coffee on and physically a cigarette burning in an ashtray.
Yes.
This was how long after he passed?
I'm not 100% sure, but I know it went on for, at least a few weeks. I remember my specific encounters there would be, I was little, so ran around the house and played like any little kid. When you pass somebody, just the physics of two people passing, you get
a little breeze,
a little breeze, and maybe the must of their cigarettes or their cologne, whatever. But my granddad specifically used Brut aftershave and smoked Marlboro Reds, very distinct smell, and be walking down the hallway or running, and you'd get that whoosh with nobody there, and the strong smell of Brut and Marlboro. And so that was my earliest encounter with anything paranormal.
How old were you?
Probably 6 or 7. I think he passed away in January, the January after I turned 6. It's kind of hazy at this point, so it was 6 or 7.
And that happened in the house that your grandmother was living in, where she was having those experiences? Or
Yes.
Did you know about what she was going through at the time?
I didn't until I was older. I think my parents they didn't tell us all of that because I don't know that we could have processed it.
As a parent, you don't really want to freak your kids out unnecessarily.
Right. And I've been in that situation with my own children.
Mm-hmm.
The last house we lived in, my wife and I, my wife, children and I, we've lived in our current residence for almost 7 years, but the house we lived in before, it was in a hospital district, and my best guess, I can't find any records, but it was some kind of small assisted living or in-home nursing care kind of place, because the way the electricity's wired, it's 3-phase instead of 2-phase electricity, so it was wired for medical use. We had several instances where, we'd go to bed, wake up the next day, all the cabinets would be open in the kitchen, like somebody's rifling through stuff. You could hear, it was a pier and beam house, so it was wood floors and they were hollow. You could hear footsteps going through the house. We actually have video of one of the sections of our living room. I don't remember if it was my son or my daughter, but they had a blow-up ball that was red with white polka dots on it, and it was sitting there moving. No, the fans weren't on, the air conditioner wasn't running. It wasn't even particularly windy that day, and so I have no explanation for why the ball was kind of moving in place. And the fun thing, and the reason it makes me think that it was a facility for older people, is our thermostat would get turned up to like 85 to 90 degrees.
The way the older people like it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And none of us were doing that. My kids, I don't know, were even tall enough to reach the thermostat, but it would happen at night when they were asleep, or during the day when we were all gone. And wasn't a digital thermostat. It was one of the old analog ones with the mercury balance in it.
Yeah.
So I have no explanation other than somebody thought that they were cold and kept messing with our thermostat.
It's cold when you're on the other side. I
Yes.
hear.
So, according to Harry Potter, yeah.
This is the house you're living in now?
No, it was the last house we lived in. I haven't had any experiences that I'm aware of in the current house.
So, having had experiences as a child, when you got to this house, were you like, oh, yeah, ghost?
Oh
Or
yeah, of course, and there was one time. So the house was kind of it was a bizarre layout, which makes sense if it was some kind of assisted living place. But there were effectively two living rooms, and so one of them was converted into a bedroom. That was our master bedroom, and it's also the room my son stayed in. He slept in one end of it right after he was born. But I remember going in one night, the lights were off. I'm trying to sneak through the room, not wake him up. Now, I don't know if a lot of people are aware of, but in your peripheral vision in the dark is a lot stronger than your straightforward vision. And so I'm really good at just trying not to look at anything in particular so I can kind of dumb my way around in the dark. But I came face to face with something, my height, just a silhouette of something like enough that I stopped dead in my shoes because I thought I was about to run into somebody. And it was big enough for me. We didn't have a bunch of stuff in there, so there was nothing I could have possibly run into. But it was like coming face to face with somebody in the dark.
it was in the dark and it was a silhouette, but you could perceive it.
I could see enough of it out of my peripherals to stop and not run into it.
Have you ever heard of the phenomenon called shadow people?
I have.
So it sounds like that's what you're describing, where it's dark, but this entity is blacker than black. It's darker than the darkness.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels like it has some mass, is what I've read about that phenomenon. Is that what it was like for you?
Yes, very much so.
And so what happened?
I was startled. I stopped and it was gone. As fast as I realized it was there, it was gone.
What did you think at the time was going on?
It didn't really surprise me because like there was so much that happened at that house. My son, when he was an infant, he would we always hear about kids giggling, cackling, making noises, but it seems like it's different when they're by themselves versus when they're interacting with somebody. And we could hear him on the monitor. It always sounded like he was talking to somebody back there. That didn't surprise me. I'd had nights where one night specifically where I woke up because it felt like a cat ran across the foot of our bed, and we have never in my lifetime had a cat.
Oh gosh!
So I just feeling the tiny feet running across. So when something like that happened, it was just like, okay.
It sounds like you don't get your feathers ruffled very easily.
No, the only time I did, and it was probably because I psyched myself out more than anything. One of the houses I grew up in, I was playing hide and seek with my brothers, and there was a closet under the stairs. And if you've ever seen one of those closets, it's just got a declining ceiling all the way down to nothing. And I was sitting in there kind of huddled in behind my dad's acoustic guitars, and that's where we stored sleeping bags and things like that. And I remember just feeling like hot air, almost like breath on the back of my neck, and scared the crap out of me. And so I was done hiding at that point. But that one, I'm not so convinced that it was an encounter, but it was enough of something to scare me. And I had to have been older elementary or earlier junior high. So when, imagination wasn't quite as wild as I was when I was younger.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the only time I've ever seen something that scared me.
Did you see something at that point, or was it just the sensation?
No, the closet was dark, and I was just hunkered down in there, and it was just the sensation.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about anybody else. When I'm playing hide and seek, it's like my senses go into a hyper awareness, so I can hear if somebody's coming, or kind of feel them coming on.
That's how you win.
Exactly. And we played hide and seek at my grandparents' house. Of course, they had a ton of places to hide, and I don't remember ever experiencing anything like that at their house. But nobody ever died in their house. I don't know that anybody died in the house that I grew up in, but I know for a fact nobody did because my grandparents had that house built. They were the only ones that lived there up until my granddad passed in 2019.
So, of course, he was the most appropriate person to be haunting it.
Right. But, I haven't played hide and seek there since he passed. And this is the grandfather on my mother's side.
The other grandfather.
He passed 3 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But he and my grandmother have been active enough in their home after they passed. I can tell you stories about them playing pranks on us. So my grandmother passed in 2016. My grandfather passed in 2019. But at my grandmother's funeral, my cousins and I were the pallbearers. We got to the graveside. We're carrying her casket out, and I know it's different in different places, but this cemetery, they had a metal frame that, they have the straps that go across it. So if something happens, it'll catch the casket, but it has these forearms with rollers on the ends of them. So you set the casket on, kind of roll it across, and it props up the casket before they lower it. We set it on there, and we start to let the weight off, and one of the arms breaks. And so we literally have to catch my grandmother to keep her from falling. And you say, oh no, but it was the funniest thing, because that was the kind of crap that she would do to us. Like, I don't know that she ever sawed a leg off on a chair so that you'd fall out of it, but I wouldn't have put it past her. Just something about it. We knew she did this. She came down and messed with us at her graveside. So fast forward 3 years, my granddad's passed. The night before the funeral, the funeral director, we heard about what happened with your grandmother, and we've worked with the cemetery to make sure everything is as it should be. They've tested the equipment, nothing, it should be smooth sailing this time. So we get to the funeral, get to the graveside, and I'm just waiting for the other shoe to drop. And of course, same arm broke again.
Are you kidding?
Yes, I am not kidding. And so when we were going through things of theirs at their house that we're getting ready to go into an estate sale, my mother, and now she's one of my friends, but she has a friend that's very much an empath. And of course, first time you meet somebody, it's like, okay, how full of crap are you? Is this real, or are you just... So she was asking this lady some questions about my grandparents, because my granddad was a magician, an illusionist, and the empath's husband also does this. So he was coming in to look and see if there's anything he wanted to buy before we put it on the market. She walks in and says, I'm getting a really strong feeling from who I think are your parents. And my mom's like, oh, okay. Yeah, okay. What can you tell me anything? And the lady says, well, they are laughing and wondering what you thought of the gravesides. This lady had no idea that any of that had ever happened. But yes, both of my grandparents pranked us at their gravesides.
Now, is this the grandmother you told me in the other series was the one that had such a wonderful parting line?
Don't call me Shirley. Yes.
Her last words on this earth were, don't call me Shirley.
Yes. Her last words to me. And she and my granddad pranked each other all the time. My granddad was an electronics enthusiast. In Lubbock, he had the first color television because he built it, probably in the 60s. Built his own color TV out of a kit. He had, their bathroom had a counter with, medicine cabinet and mirrors, but the cabinets were almost as deep as you would expect in a kitchen. Those overhung the sinks, a Jack and Jill kind of sink. He had little portable radio-based TVs, but he also had one that he mounted up under that cabinet. And my grandmother, I don't know what possessed her to do this, but she took it had to have been matte black construction paper or poster board, more or less, cut it out to the exact shape of the screen and taped it in there. And he ended up throwing that TV away because he thought it was broken. He could, turn on, he could hear the sound, but he couldn't see a picture.
For a prank.
Yeah. And there are so many stories of them doing that. So there was no doubt in any of our minds that when the same exact thing happened twice in a row, 3 years apart, there's no coincidence there.
That was not a prank on your family. That was a prank on the funeral director, who must have been
Oh
horrified.
gosh. Well, but it was, and what's funny is they had the same maintenance guy, and the maintenance guy at the second go around with my granddad was standing over by the hearse. He was, he was confident they'd fixed the problem, but he wasn't that confident.
Oh, I
And
hope
so
somebody
he
got
was
a picture
standing
of him in that moment.
Oh man, I wish, like, we were all expecting it and they delivered.
You weren't surprised. He must have been.
No, and we told them, well, we made sure this won't happen again. I was like, don't hold your breath, because if there's a way for them to make this happen again, it's going to happen.
Well, it sounds like your entire family has embraced the whole idea that your family relations are really more of an eternal thing and not a finite thing, not confined to the earth. Is that something that was talked about and embraced throughout your childhood? And did you inherit that acceptance from them? Or is it just something, because of your early experience, it just was normal for you from the start?
Well, no, not really early on. It wasn't anything that we'd ever really talked about. My mom had some experiences, but I was older when I heard about those. She was staying with my aunt and uncle, and they were doing some remodeling, and my mom was staying there. And at that point, my aunt and uncle had their first daughter, and she was still in a crib. And my mom was sleeping in her room because that was the only place with room available. And she woke up one morning because the door cracked open, a little bit of light came in, and she saw a man come in, kind of lean over the crib, check on the baby, and then exit the room. And at breakfast later that morning, she asked my uncle, is everything okay? And what are you talking about? Well, you came in and you checked on Jenny this morning about 5:30. He said, I didn't leave my room all night. So my mom's convinced that was her granddad, who I don't know if he helped build the house, but lived there for a very long time. And then shortly after my grandmother passed on my mom's side back in 2015, my mom was going through a major depressive episode, to the point that it was all we could do to get her out of bed. And she was out pumping gas one day, and she said my grandmother appeared to her and said, I don't want this for you. You need to get up and you need to get on. Just, hearing her tell that story. And that was 6 years ago, thereabouts.
Did she describe that as a physical manifestation, like bodily? You could feel her weight on the bed if she sat next to her, kind of thing, or not like an apparition?
She said she saw her. She didn't really describe it to me. Of course, my mom was having a hard time talking about it. But it sounded very much like she experienced an apparition of my grandmother being. It is something that seems to have happened around the family for as long as I can remember, but they never really told me about any of that stuff. A lot of it didn't happen until I was older, or they didn't tell me about it until I was older. It's just kind of always been there, I guess.
So even though it wasn't maybe talked about until you were a little bit older, I'm not sensing that you had to make any kind of adjustment to your worldview.
No,
that it already kind of felt like the truth to you. Is that accurate?
And that probably has to do with growing up. I was a huge fan of Ghostbusters. Yeah. So it really wasn't a huge suspension of disbelief to get into those movies.
But you knew the difference between fiction and reality.
Oh yeah, I knew the difference. But as you can see, another part of my upbringing, and really the last one that I would say is notable, is probably the craziest story I have. I always like to save it for last because I think it's the best one, because I can't explain it. And if it sounds like I'm exaggerating, I'm not in any way, shape, or form. So I grew up, my dad and I were avid hunters. When I was younger, I was a world-class tournament archer. My dad and I were at a place called Balmorhea. It's here in Texas, doing a hog hunt. And those, you go out early because you can hunt them in the dark, since they were domesticated animals that either went feral or vice versa. Anything that's a completely wild animal, deer, anything like that, you can only hunt in the daylight. But
Right.
hogs, you can hunt nocturnally. And so we went out one night. We were on, I think it was called the Lone Wolf Ranch, if memory serves correct. And there was the hunting lodge, which was a double wide trailer that had been bricked in, and about 100 yards, maybe 150 up a hill was the ranch house. And it was 2 stories, I believe. At the time the ranch house was built, and by the time it was vacated, no electricity had ever been run to it. There are lots of stories that kind of floated around about it, but the story was that early on, the family that lived there was a bullpen not far from the house where they would keep their road bulls, keep them from goring the other animals. And the daughter of the rancher and his wife got out of the house, got into the bullpen, and was killed. So I imagine that had to have happened early 1900s. We went out on the hog hunt one evening, came back after dark, and we're walking up to the front porch on the hunting lodge, and look up, and there is a pink light emanating out of a set of windows. So there are 2 sets of 4 pane windows, and that was odd enough. I mean, a pink light is unusual.
It is.
And we're talking like salmon kind of pink. So our guide had a pair of Leica binoculars. We're talking probably a $2,000 set of binoculars, very nice binoculars. We all took turns looking, and you could see the silhouette of what looked like a little girl standing in the window. She passed from one window to the other and then back. That was kind of creepy because there's no electricity in the house at that point, other than flashlights, battery operated lights. We didn't have LED, portable LED lights, anything like that.
Right.
Nothing that would be as diffused a light as that was. Just kind of give you a frame of reference. When you shine a flashlight, it leaves a spot on the wall. Whereas if you're in somebody's kitchen, they've got fluorescent lighting, and you see those plastic sheets over the light, that diffuses it so that there's no harsh lights. And this was a very diffused light, and looked like it was coming from the floor, or at least it was the point of emanation was very low. Next morning, we were all kind of on edge going to bed, but the next morning we were going out early. It was still dark to go on the hunt, and we're looking up at the house, no light, no nothing. We come back, go to breakfast. That's all we could talk about is, what did we see? Because there's a degree to which, okay, I'm not even believing what I'm saying here, but that our guide was also a known prankster. So I'm thinking this guy, he's probably just pulling it over. And so we come back from breakfast, and we're looking at the house, and from where we were standing on the porch, those windows did not exist. There were no windows that high on the house. And the shape of those windows did not match any other windows on that side of the house. So we walked around. The only windows we could have seen were on the corner 90 degrees, or on the wall 90 degrees from where we were standing. On the back side of the house, we could not have possibly seen it from anywhere where we were standing by the hunting lodge. And the extra kicker was, if we could have seen those windows, there was a tree grown up in front of it. We couldn't have seen into the windows anyway.
How far away were you when you were looking through the binoculars?
We were about 100, maybe 150 yards away.
And the binoculars brought you in pretty close.
Yeah. It was clear enough. I could distinctly see 4 panes of windows and the silhouette of a short person with long hair.
And was that silhouette, so it would have been a backlit figure?
Yes.
And when you said that it moved from one window to the next, did that look like a floating action or a walking action? What was that like?
I couldn't say. That was long enough ago that I don't really remember it. The way I seem to remember describing it was, if you're looking through one window and you lean to look through the other one.
Yeah.
But not so.
Not that she was walking
over.
back and forth.
No,
right.
no. It was almost like she was looking back at us and looked through a different window to get a better view.
Yes. Okay. So it makes me I want to hold on to what you're telling me about your guide being a prankster. And I'm like, oh, could this have been a cutout that he was moving back and forth? But then you go to the next section, you say the windows just weren't even there.
The windows weren't there.
The windows weren't there. So I want to ask you now with this, first of all, freaky, but you're describing virtually a lifetime of extraordinary encounters, most of which appear to be ghostly in nature. I do want to point out that poltergeists seem to prefer kitchen cabinets to any other thing in the world. Whenever I hear a poltergeist story, it always has something to do with kitchen cabinets. Yeah. But I'm just wondering, how does this sit with you? Do you feel conflict within you, having to acknowledge that these things are happening? You don't appear to be spooked in any way. It doesn't appear to bother you. I'm just wondering, how does it affect your day-to-day life, just assimilating these experiences into your worldview?
So I grew up going to church, and part of that is believing that there is a spiritual realm.
Of course.
And even if you don't go to church, there are many atheistic people who believe in the spiritual realm. And for me, it just feels like it's just a part of life. I mean, just as much as we have a blue sky, or I have two brothers, I mean, this has just always kind of been there. Now, the experiences seem to be scarce. It's not something that I encounter weekly or even annually. It's just always kind of been there. And I think some of it has to do with, and I don't know if it's lineage, but I am part Cherokee.
A very spiritual people.
Yes, and that comes from my grandfather on my dad's side, the one that passed when I was 6, the one that was the first encounter I remember.
The coffee and cigarettes grandpa.
The coffee and cigarettes grandpa, yes. He would know things before they happened. I remember hearing one specific story. He had a German Shepherd. I think it was a German Shepherd, but the dog came from Germany and was trained in German. And so all of his commands, my granddad had to learn these German commands to get the dog to do what he needed. One day the dog was going ballistic and howling. My grandmother, what's wrong with the dog? And my granddad said, oh, so-and-so just died. And I don't know who this person was, but my granddad knew that they died. Within half an hour, they got the phone call, this person had died. And I had a similar experience with my grandmother's, my paternal grandmother's, the one that experienced the coffee and cigarettes. Her second stepfather passed away, I want to think around 2004. I was on a hunting trip with my dad. Actually, my dad had left already, and I was staying an extra night. But I went to bed that night, and he would be my step great grandfather, I suppose you could call him. His name was TJ, and I was going to bed, and I remember having the thought that I'm never going to see TJ again. Just unprompted, out of nowhere, and that night he passed away. And so there's just always been there's always been something innate there to your question, how has that affected me? It's just kind of always been there.
It isn't something that you have to work out. It just is
right.
part of your worldview.
Right. And none of it really, of course, my grandparents pranking us at their funerals, that makes total sense. But, the little girl appearing in a set of windows that did not exist on that side of the house, which I have heard of, I don't know if you'd call them projections, but whatever the spirit or the entity remembers, that's how we can see things in those instances. So if she believed that was her side of the house, we may have been seeing her windows.
The entire manifestation
right.
was her perception.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and that does not make any sense to me.
Yeah, but it's a little hard to wrap your head around.
But it's not a hard pill to swallow either, because I know what I saw. And it wasn't just me. There were 4 of us there. We all saw the same thing. It's not hard to reconcile that.
Yeah. So the acknowledgement, the recognition of a spiritual realm. I know, I spent a number of years in the church as well, where of course, you're accepting spirit. But when you start talking about realms, or you start talking about, I believe there's direct scripture that forbids in the Old Testament trying to contact the dead or trying to communicate with the dead or dealing with sorcerers. There's Old Testament rules against that kind of thing. So in general, discussion within a church environment of the paranormal almost is intrinsically linked to a discussion of the demonic. And that's something that I had to work through. I was nearly 40 when I started my Christian church journey. So I had 40 years before I decided I was going to accept Christianity as my religion. And then I was 17 years later laying that down. And in that process, coming back to the first 40 years of my life, I've had a fascination with all things paranormal since I was a kid. I don't have as many personal experiences to share, but it's been a passionate interest of mine really my whole life, except for that 17-year period where
it's just kind of taboo.
It was told to me that was simply not acceptable. I got rid of videos and DVDs of any kind of supernatural film that I had. I got rid of all the books that I had. I just did not allow a discussion of those things in my life. And I missed it, but I had convinced myself, or I had allowed myself to become convinced that it was not correct, that either it wasn't real or it wasn't safe.
Yeah. Well, and so I mentioned in the last podcast, I grew up and went to Christian schools, and I would consider that kind of, and not necessarily that you were this way, but you being taught that as kind of fanatical. And I come to that conclusion from, we had a specific teacher who tried to have Harry Potter banned from our school because of the witchcraft and wizardry, and that's inherently evil. All the and the way I kind of the way I approach it is there are plenty of examples in Scripture of people talking to entities not within our domain,
right? Whether they're angels, spiritual or whether they're
spirits, right? And where I see the line being drawn in a healthy way is the forbiddance of contacting that realm being a safety precaution, because there is so little that we as humans know or possibly could comprehend about it, that you could get into something extremely dangerous and life-threatening. So I can see why, trying to make contact might not be the best idea, but I don't think it's inherently evil when something like that happens, or even having a fascination with it, or liking Harry Potter. I don't see anything wrong with any of that, as long as you don't travel down a rabbit hole. And I think a really good example of that, there was a movie called White Noise with Michael Keaton that came out several years ago. And yes, it's crazy fiction, but I think it's a good example of why going down a road like that could be a dangerous venture, because you just don't know what you're getting into. And ultimately the spirits he got in contact with killed him. If you believe in the Bible, there's a point to which you have to believe in demonic possession. And it's not unreasonable to think that in some instances, those demons were invited in because somebody was messing with something that they had no concept of. And so to that end, I can see, not pursuing contact. Now, education, it's whatever. If you want to learn about it, that's fine. But that's how I would, in my mind, reconcile the two.
Yeah, there's a difference between watching a documentary or reading a book about paranormal things or supernatural encounters, and buying yourself you're right, buying yourself a spell book and trying to conjure stuff.
Exactly.
But for the most part, my experiences were mostly in the evangelical / charismatic church, which embraces all kinds of things, depending on how. If you're going to tell me I need to start speaking in some unknown language, or I'm not saved. And then at the same time, I need to go not only get rid of, but when we were told to go and purge our video collections in a sermon one day, it wasn't just get rid of them. It was don't pass your demons along to somebody else. Don't go sell them in a yard sale. You need to destroy these things.
Yeah.
That to me is a step too far, mostly because it's imprisoning the mind. It's telling people these are subjects you can't think about, you can't explore. And I know that I had a big revelation one day when I confessed on Facebook that my guilty pleasure was watching Dexter. I felt that Dexter would not be an acceptable thing to admit to my church family that I watched this show, I would be looked down upon. And the funniest thing happened, the results that I felt like I was making this huge confession and that people were going to be horrified that I was being so outrageous by acknowledging that I liked this program. And I must have gotten 50 comments from people laughing at me for considering that a guilty pleasure. They're like, I watch Dexter all the time. And these were people that I went to church with, but nobody, they weren't talking about it, but they were still engaging in it. And we didn't talk about it. So I was like, wait a second, I'm the only one that's been actually playing by the rules all this time.
Those of us who grew up in a very, conservative church environment, those are things that I still have to take a step back and go, no, that's just stupid.
And that's why it's so important, if you want your family to have some kind of spiritual grounding, whatever as a parent you decide that is for your child, then you want that influence to be healthy. And so I don't have a problem with Christianity. There's a great deal about that I still adhere to and find appealing. I will probably never set foot in a church building again, because it's not the Bible I have a problem with, and it's not God that I have a problem with. It's the authority figures in the contemporary American Christian church, and the absolutely. Sheer volume of spiritual abuse that is going on when we try to tell our congregations how to live, how to think, how to dress. I'm done with that part of my life, and this podcast exists as a direct result of me rejecting that and returning to my authentic self. My authentic self was created by the very same God that you're asking me to give my life to. Well, this is me doing that. And I'm not going to apologize for that any longer. And that means I get to explore all of the stories that you just told me. I'm not going to tell my audience whether they should take you at your word or not, whether they should change their worldview about it or not. I'm saying you're a person that I'm acquainted with personally. You're not a stranger. You're not selling anything. You're simply sharing your experience with me. Make of that what you will. But by all means,
never mind if they believe it or not.
Yes.
I mean, I know what I experienced, and nobody's going to convince me otherwise, but yeah.
Right. And what I'm trying to accomplish with this series is just to stimulate discussion and thought. I'm not trying to influence. I'm not trying to say, hey, everybody, you need to believe this. But I am saying, let's not ignore the fact that these people have had these extraordinary experiences, yours and the other guests that are going to be a part of this series. By all means, listen. So I'll watch programming now that I didn't watch for 17 years because I felt that it would in some way poison my thinking or something. I mean, it's hard for me to
it was almost like it was some kind of contamination.
Yeah, that was the sense. And now it's like, you know what? I'm a grown woman. My hair is gray. If I'm that fragile that I can't watch an episode of Ancient Aliens where I'm going to learn about these ancient sites that predate what we can learn from the Old Testament, that the timeline of humanity is. There are civilizations that came and went before the Bible even begins. But we're not allowed to look at that because it causes us to have questions. And when you have questions, that's problematic for the human beings whose knowledge isn't perfect, their job is to shepherd us on a weekly basis. So we're just going to not look at any of that. I'm no longer about that. I want to see it all. I want to see it in person if I can. We're going to Europe next year. And my husband said, hey, let's visit Sardinia. It's beautiful there. I said, yes, it is. And there are some ancient sites there that I really need to see.
Oh, that'd be cool.
Before my life is over. Yeah.
Something you said made me think of UFOs. And I think I have seen UFOs.
Do you?
So, so my dad and my brother have a bow fishing charter that they run, but we were in Waco. I can't remember what lake it was, but we were somewhere near. We were near a military base, and I remember seeing, and all of us saw, it wasn't just me, but these lights shooting up. They almost look like flares launching into the air. These were launching that fast and then hovering, getting darker and brighter. And then when they started to, I would describe it as burning out. They would go up as they burned out.
Fast, very fast.
Faster than you would expect, from the distance that I think we had to have been a couple of miles from it, just because of the distance of the lake, and saw several of these things that night. I work in video and film, things like that. So I'm familiar with drones. I've worked on military bases. I've experienced a lot of really cool things that it's like, okay, I thought those only existed in movies. This was one of those times that I saw something and I was like, the physics of this does not make sense.
Did you have a sense that they were coming out of the water?
No, they were beyond the water. Just judging by the trajectory and how high up in the atmosphere they were, I don't think they were anywhere close to the water.
The trajectory was straight 90 degrees?
Yeah, perpendicular from the ground.
So up, hover, up.
Yeah, and disappear.
And what you saw was light. You didn't see a craft.
Yes.
You saw light that changed in intensity.
Yes.
That's that's a very common type of sighting. It fits with a very wide, it's an area of great interest of mine. So I encourage you to listen to the rest of this series, because I've got some UFO people coming on that will tell you a few fascinating stories of their own. But because I read a lot in this area, I know that what you're describing is super duper common. For me, the fascinating part is just the freedom to explore everything that can be known, and to be okay with the uncertainty in the places where things cannot be known. I don't claim to have a complete understanding or all the answers, and I'm not even going to dig my heels in and say I believe this or I don't believe this. I'll go so far as to say all of this is endlessly fascinating to me. I know a lot about it because I do a lot of reading about it, and I watch a lot of videos and a lot of documentaries, and I have a number of friends who are experiencers. So it's an area of interest, and I think that it in some ways informs my creative expressions as well. And that's really what the whole podcast is about. I want to light up people's minds with areas of interest to me, but also things that I honestly think, whether you dive deep or not, we all wonder about this. Yeah. You might even be somebody who sits there and says, oh, that's just a bunch of hogwash, but you wonder about it. You do,
Well, that's kind of my thing, is like whether I believe that something exists, or like, let's go with aliens. If they exist, as long as I don't get abducted, it's probably not going to change the trajectory of my life one bit. It might deviate it a little bit, but I'm still going to end up, by the time I die, probably the same place, no matter which side of that coin I land on. And so, people that really want to get into arguing as to whether they exist, they don't exist, it's frivolous. Just like you said, if it makes you wonder, go free to wonder.
Yeah. And for me, whether they exist or not isn't the issue. Whether it's real or not isn't the issue. Whether somebody is lying or telling the truth isn't even the issue. The issue for me is something's going on. I don't have to know what it is, but I am all about exploration. So I don't have to answer questions just to have a lively curiosity about something. And it doesn't really have to go any further than that. If this podcast inspires somebody to look more deeply into anything that they heard here today, then my mission is accomplished. I just want people to be thinking and to be engaged and to really be thinking things through instead of, scrolling through social media, seeing a meme or seeing a headline or seeing some kind of clickbait, spending 5 minutes on a topic and deciding what you think about it. It's not enough. And those little bite-sized nuggets are kind of all that we get today, unless we take the initiative to spend more time thinking about things,
Yeah.
That's
Yes.
really all I'm after today. And to that end, I want to thank you for being a part of that and for sharing your stories. You have lighted up my mind today.
Good.
I appreciate having a chance to get to know you in another way and for your candor in sharing your experiences with us.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to thank Ross Hamil for joining me for the second time today. I just think he's an amazing human being, and I have a very strong sense that if I had not stopped the recording, that conversation could have gone on forever and ever and ever. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. We covered a lot more territory than I thought, and I have a sneaking suspicion there's more for Ross to tell. So who knows, if I do another paranormal series, perhaps we'll have him back again. My closing thought for you today is not a poem. Been doing a lot of those. It's, I don't know, I guess it's a thought. I'll call it a thought. It's something that came across meme style in my Facebook newsfeed. Took a little screenshot of it. The author is Brooke Hampton. And this statement resonated with me, so I'm going to share it with you today. I am pieces of all the places that I've been and the people that I have loved. I've been stitched together by song lyrics, book quotes, adventure, late night conversations, moonlight, and the smell of coffee. Yes to all of that, all day long. I'll leave you with that thought today, and I will say, until next time, thanks for listening. Come on back, and I will see you next time. Cool Gray in Studio A is a fine-tuned services production. It exists for entertainment purposes and is not intended to be used as a sole source of information or advice on any subject. Find and follow this podcast at coolgraystudios.com.